Mr. Cotter, you will find that when a property abuts a planned community of Ridgemont's caliber, certain community standards simply apply by proximity. That is just how these things work. That was Diane Pruitt, president of the Ridgemont Estates Homeowners Association, standing at the edge of my gravel drive with a cream linen blazer and kitten heels that were already sinking into the soft ground. Clipboard tucked under one arm, her husband's development signs going up behind her on the ridge. She said it the way a person says something they have rehearsed in a mirror. Calm, certain, and completely, provably wrong. What she did not know was that I had spent 25 years as a journeyman lineman and crew supervisor for the Blue Ridge Rural Electric Cooperative, and that I had read every recorded instrument on the 11 acres under my feet the day my wife Sandra and I first walked that boundary together. I knew what was buried under Diane Pruitt's prized entrance boulevard. I knew what was buried under the corner of her gated fence line, and under the path her husband had plotted for his Phase 2 utility conduit. I knew what the 1962 Rural Cooperative Easement Corridor said, word for word, because I had printed it off the county's land records portal and kept it in a labeled folder in the top drawer of my desk. The same drawer where I kept Sandra's copy of the original deed, the same drawer where I had been adding pages ever since. Diane Pruitt had never looked at any of it, not once. What would you have done with that knowledge? Sitting on 11 acres with the power off and your sick daughter wrapped in blankets in a January that hit 27 degrees. Drop your answer in the comments. I kept mine in that folder. My name is Ray Cotter. I am 58 years old. I spent 25 years climbing poles and pulling wire for the Blue Ridge Rural Electric Cooperative, working my way from an apprentice who was afraid of heights to a crew supervisor who ran the overnight outage teams and signed off on the right-of-way inspections. I know how distribution easements work. I know how they are recorded and how they can go dormant and what dormant does not mean. It does not mean vacated. I retired from the co-op when my knees finally put in a formal objection, and I have been doing private electrical contracting on my own since, which suits me fine because I set my own hours and I can be home when Callie gets off the bus. Callie is 16 now. She does cross-country. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of reading the fine print before she signs anything, which I consider a gift I cannot take any credit for. Sandra and I bought this parcel in the Blue Ridge foothills of Western Virginia 14 years ago. 11 acres of cleared and wooded land, a creek running along the south fence line, a view of the ridge from the back porch that changes color with every season and never stops being worth looking at. Sandra was a county assessor. She knew land records the way I knew conductor gauge, which is to say she knew them the way a craftsman knows the material, not the way a tourist reads a pamphlet. She chose this parcel because the deed was clean and the recorded history was long. We pulled the full chain before we signed. Deed, survey plat, recorded easements and covenants, every instrument in the title going back to the original land grant. Sandra made a copy of everything and filed it in a labeled accordion folder that she kept on the bottom shelf of her office bookcase. She told me once that the folder was the cheapest insurance policy a landowner could buy. And she was right, though I did not understand the full weight of it until after she was gone. We built the house ourselves over 2 years, evenings and weekends. Callie sleeping in a pack-and-play in the corner of what would become the kitchen, while Sandra held the other end of a chalk line and I drove the framing nails. 2 years of that. And then we had a house. And then we had 12 years of the life we had wanted. And then Sandra died of a fast and merciless cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. And Callie was 12 and I was 54. And the 11 acres were the only place in the world that still felt like the three of us in the same room. I was not going to lose it. I started keeping a legal pad the week after Sandra's funeral. Not because I expected trouble, but because she had taught me to document everything, and The habit was the last thing of hers I had left that I could practice every day. The manila folder lived in the top drawer of my desk. I added to it. I did not know then how much I would need it. The first letter from Ridgemont Estates arrived on a Tuesday in April, 4 years ago. It was a courtesy notice. The envelope said so in the subject line, italicized, as if the phrasing of the envelope would soften whatever was inside. The letter informed me that my parcel appeared to be in violation of Ridgemont's aesthetic covenants regarding exterior storage and unimproved surfaces, and that, as a neighboring property owner, I was encouraged to bring the parcel into compliance at my earliest convenience. I stood on the porch reading it, with my coffee going cold, and Rufus sitting at my feet, watching me the way a blue heeler watches a person who has stopped moving. Which is to say, with a focus that borders on accusation, my parcel was not in Ridgemont. It had never been in Ridgemont. The HOA's recorded plat, which I pulled up on the county's land records portal before I finished my second cup, showed Ridgemont Estates as a subdivision platted in 2009, 112 lots, common area, and an amenity strip running along the entrance boulevard. My parcel predated the subdivision by decades in its current configuration and shared a fence line along the north edge of Ridgemont's common area. But that shared line was a boundary, not a membership. I was on one side, they were on the other. I wrote back on paper, one paragraph, certified mail, no hostility but nothing left out. The parcel at the referenced address is not subject to Ridgemont Estates covenants, as it is not included in the recorded plat. I enclosed a photocopy of the plat page with my parcel outlined and my property line drawn in red ink. I filed the letter, the enclosure, and the return receipt in the manila folder. That was item 1. Diane Pruitt showed up in person that October. That was my first look at the cream linen blazer, the clipboard, and the kitten heels, all 3 of them wrong for a gravel drive in the Virginia foothills in the fall. She introduced herself as the president of Ridgemont Estates, going on 6 years in that role. And she said it the way a person names a credential they have paid for and expect to be honored. She was polite. She was performing politeness. There is a difference, and Sandra had made sure I could read it. Diane explained, with a patient and slightly tilted smile, that while she understood my technical position, the proximity of my parcel to the Ridgemont entrance created a kind of associative relationship, and that the community had invested significantly in its aesthetic character, and that a property like mine, abutting that entrance so directly, was something the association had to take seriously. She used the word functionally. My parcel was functionally within the association's sphere of concern. Rufus had stopped barking and was sitting next to my left boot, watching her with the flat professional attention of an animal that has already made up its mind. I told her my parcel was not functionally anything, it was not legally. She looked at the folder under my arm, which I had brought out with me out of habit, and then looked back at my face, and her smile shifted by half a degree in a direction I could not have named but recognized. She said she was sure we could find a common-sense resolution. I said I was sure we already had one. She turned and walked back to the white SUV idling at the end of the drive, the vanity plate reading RIDGMNT in a brushed chrome frame. I went inside and wrote the date, the time, and what she had said, word for word, on the legal pad. I noted the kitten heels and the clipboard. I noted the white SUV. I noted that she had looked at the folder before she looked back at me. That was item 2. The formal complaint to the county code office arrived the following February. Diane had filed it with the county's zoning and land use division, citing unpermitted structures and code violations on my parcel. A code officer named Holt came out on a Wednesday morning, introduced himself, and walked the property with me for 40 minutes in a light drizzle. His own clipboard was county issue, worn at the corners. He was methodical and thorough, and he did not editorialize. He looked at the shop building, the storage lean-to, the gravel pad, the generator shed. He looked at the fence line. There were no unpermitted structures. There were no violations. He wrote up his findings on the county form and filed them with the division before he left. And he handed me a copy on his way to the truck. Before he drove off, he said, without quite looking at me, that these types of calls sometimes came in from neighbors who were disappointed about zoning outcomes or development timelines, and that his job was to check the facts and not the intentions behind the complaint. He said if another complaint came in, he would call me before he drove out, as a courtesy. I thanked him, went inside, and filed his report with his business card, clipped to the corner. Item 3. I had started keeping a running count in the top right corner of each page in the folder. The complaint about the meter base arrived that fall. Ridgemont used a private electrical contractor, Summit Power Services, for subdivision maintenance. Diane filed a complaint with Summit claiming that my meter base and associated conduit run near the north fence line constituted a safety hazard and were encroaching on shared infrastructure. Neither of those things was true. My meter base had been set by the Rural Co-op in 1987 and was documented in the co-op's installation records, which I had pulled from my own archive. It was on my property, on my side of the fence, installed under a co-op permit that was still on file. Summit sent me a 30-day correction notice without calling me first. I called Summit's service manager that same afternoon and identified myself by name and my 25 years of co-op credentials. I told him what I was about to send him. The co-op's original installation records with the AS-built location noted, a photograph of the meter base with a tape measure running to the survey pin, and the GIS coordinate from the county's own land records portal. I told him I would have it in his inbox before 5 o'clock. He said he would wait. He called back 2 days later and withdrew the notice. He sounded like a man who had been given bad information and was not pleased about it. I thanked him, filed the withdrawal letter, and went back to work. Item 4. None of this was about code or safety. It had a direction, and the direction was pressure. The summer of the 3rd year was when the direction became a map. Glenn Pruitt, Diane's husband, filed a Phase 2 development permit application with the County Planning Commission. I saw it in the public notice section of the county's online permit portal, which I checked monthly the way a careful person checks their bank statement. Pruitt Land Holdings, applicant. Phase 2 of Ridgemont Estates. 41 luxury townhome units on the parcel immediately north and west of the existing subdivision, incorporating common area adjustments and infrastructure extensions. The application was 43 pages. I printed all of them. The Phase 2 site plan showed a proposed underground utility conduit trench running along the western edge of Ridgemont's amenity strip and continuing north through the Phase 2 site. I laid the site plan on my desk next to the county plat and next to the printed copy of the 1962 easement instrument that had been in my folder since Sandra first put it there 14 years ago. The conduit trench ran straight through the easement corridor. 50 feet wide, recorded by the Blue Ridge Rural Electric Cooperative for distribution line access, crossing the land that was now Ridgemont's common area and amenity strip, extending north toward the ridge. The co-op had been absorbed into a regional utility authority in 1991. The easement had gone dormant when they rerouted the distribution line in 1994. But dormant is not vacated. An easement can sit in a deed book for 60 years without being exercised, and it is still there, still recorded, still enforceable by the holder. Glenn Pruitt's engineers had drawn a 230-foot utility trench through a 50-foot right-of-way that was not theirs to trench through. They had not looked. I picked up the phone and called Ed Ferris. Ed had worked the county deed room for 31 years before he retired. And before that, he had been the Rural Electric Co-op's own easement recorder, which is exactly how I had met him during my early lineman years when we were both working through the same right-of-way disputes on the distribution lines. He was 71 now, kept bees, and still went into the courthouse 2 mornings a week because, as he said, he could not stand not knowing what was getting filed. I drove to his house that evening and spread the documents on his kitchen table while he put on coffee. He looked at the 1962 instrument, the site plan, and the GIS overlay, without saying anything for a full minute. Then he said the easement had never been vacated. He knew that because he had been the one who would have had to file the vacation instrument, and he never had. He said the regional utility authority that had absorbed the co-op held the dormant rights as part of a legacy easement portfolio they had never formally reviewed for disposition or release. He said he knew the records officer at the authority. He said there was a standard policy for transferring dormant, non-strategic easement rights to adjacent landowners or interested parties for a nominal consideration when the request was supported by documentation. He said nominal consideration meant $1. He looked at me over the top of his coffee mug and said he had already been thinking about how to draft the request letter, just from the way I had described it on the phone. He had the draft done before I left. I took it home, read it twice, signed it, made a copy for the folder, and sent the original certified mail the next morning. That was item 8, though I did not file it among the complaint items. It was something different. I did not tell Diane Pruitt. I did not mention it to Deputy Dale Whitmore, whom I had gotten to know across 3 separate visits he had made to my property on Ridgemont's filed complaints. Dale was a careful man, a decade in the department, who explained on his first visit that every complaint filed with the department generated a response regardless of merit, and that he had no discretion in that, but that a documented pattern of filed complaints over time was a matter a court or a prosecutor could look at in a different light than any single incident. He was fair. He told me to keep building the record and to call him if anything crossed what he called a line. He said he would know it when I described it. I thanked him each time he drove out and added his visit reports to the folder. Items 5, 6, and 7. The letter to the utility authority was item 8, and I kept it separate because it was not a defensive move. It was the thing I had been building toward without knowing I was building toward it. The Roanoke attorney letter arrived in early winter. HOA Counsel for Ridgemont Estates. Letterhead crisp, language careful. The letter was a formal demand that I grant a temporary construction access easement across the north edge of my parcel, a strip 20 feet wide, for Phase 2 staging and equipment movement. It described this as a mutual accommodation between neighboring landowners and noted that it would facilitate the efficient completion of a project that would improve property values throughout the area. I read it 3 times. The north edge of my parcel ran along Ridgemont's amenity strip, and the amenity strip ran along the Phase 2 site. Glenn's equipment needed to swing through my land to avoid tearing up the entrance boulevard. I called my attorney that afternoon, a woman named Carol Hines, who had done our closing when Sandra and I bought the parcel, and who had been handling the responses to the complaint letters. I told her what the letters said. She told me to sit tight for 24 hours while she confirmed what we both already knew. She confirmed it. I had no legal obligation to grant any easement, and no court was going to compel me to facilitate a private development project on a timeline that suited the developer. I wrote back through Carol, 1 page, 1 sentence that mattered. The parcel is not available for easement grant. Item 9. The response from Roanoke acknowledged receipt and said nothing else. 2 weeks later, Meg Dunlap called. Meg was a Ridgemont board member, had been for 3 years, and she sounded on the phone like a person who had been carrying something for a while and had finally decided she was done carrying it. We met at a diner off the main county road on a Saturday morning. She arrived before I did and had already ordered coffee for both of us. She put a 2-page memo on the table the moment I sat down. Pruitt Land Holdings letterhead, addressed to Diane, dated 9 months earlier. The memo laid out a Phase 2 acquisition timeline that included, in plain language, a notation that the adjacent private parcel represented a potential acquisition opportunity if sufficient administrative and regulatory pressure could be applied to the current owner in advance of the permit filing. Sufficient administrative and regulatory pressure. I read it twice with my coffee going cold. I asked her how she got it. She said it had been forwarded to all board members as part of a planning update, and she did not think anyone had expected her to read it as carefully as she did. She said she had 3 kids and owned her house outright and had joined the board because she thought she was helping run a neighborhood, not a land acquisition scheme. She said she would give a sworn affidavit if it ever came to that, and she had already spoken to a notary. I pulled out my phone, photographed both pages of the memo at the table, and asked her to keep the original somewhere that was not her house. She said she had already put a copy with her sister in Richmond. I drove home and filed the photographs, labeled them clearly, and wrote up the meeting on the legal pad. Item 10. I now had a map and a motive and a witness. I needed one more thing, and it was already in the mail. The Regional Utility Authority's response arrived 6 weeks after I had sent the request. The letter came certified, return receipt requested, and I recognized the authority's letterhead from my co-op days. They had reviewed the dormant easement portfolio as part of a routine records evaluation. The 1962 Blue Ridge Rural Electric Cooperative Distribution Easement, corridor width 50 feet, as recorded in the county deed books, had been evaluated and determined to be non-strategic to current operations and the authority's forward infrastructure plan. In consideration of $1 and other good and valuable consideration, the authority was prepared to assign the full easement rights to Ray Cotter, the owner of the adjacent parcel of record, subject to proper recording of the assignment instrument. Ed Ferris had already drafted the assignment. I signed it the same afternoon the letter arrived, wrote a check for $1 payable to the Regional Utility Authority, and mailed both back with a cover letter thanking the records officer by name. 10 days later, Ed called me from the parking lot of the county courthouse. His voice was steady, but I could hear the satisfaction in it. The particular satisfaction of a man who has spent his career watching documents go into the record and knows exactly what it means when the right one does. He said, "It is recorded. Deed book, page number, your name, this morning." I wrote the book and page number on the legal pad, added the instrument to the folder, and went back to wiring a panel in the next county. I did not say anything to Diane. I did not say anything to Glenn. I did not say anything to anyone except Ed, and Ed already knew. I was not finished. I was close, but the folder was not done yet. 3 weeks after the assignment recorded, Diane Pruitt went to Summit Power Services for the 3rd time. This time, she did not use the complaint process. She sent Summit's service manager a document that appeared to be an order from the State Corporation Commission of Virginia, directing Summit to disconnect electrical service to my parcel pending a compliance review of alleged safety violations. The document had an SCC letterhead, a case number, a division name, and a signature. It looked official at a distance. Summit's service manager, the same one who had withdrawn the meter-based notice 2 years earlier, did not call me this time. He sent a crew out on a Thursday morning in January. I was 20 miles away at a farmhouse service upgrade when my daughter called me. Callie was home from school with a fever of 101. She said the power had just gone out and the thermostat on the wall said 62 and dropping, and she did not know what had happened. She said it in the level way she talks when she is trying not to make it worse than it is, which she gets from Sandra. And hearing that steadiness in her voice while she was sick and cold, and the temperature outside was 27 degrees, put something in my chest that I'm not going to describe as a feeling, because it was more like a physical event. I told her the wool blankets were in the hall closet and to stay on the couch with Rufus, and I would be home in 30 minutes. I drove those 20 miles at the edge of what the law permits and found the Summit disconnect tag on my meter base when I pulled in. I got the generator running and the space heater going in the living room and went in to find Callie on the couch with both the wool blankets and Rufus wedged against her the way he wedges against people he has decided need warmth. I took her temperature again, still 101. I told her she was going to be fine, that there was a mistake with the power company and I was handling it. And she looked at me over the edge of the blanket with Sandra's eyes and said, "Is it Diane Pruitt again?" I said, "I thought so." She said, "Then handle it, Dad." I went out to the porch with my phone and called Dale Whitmore. I told him what the disconnect tag said and what Summit's paperwork said and what I was about to tell him next, which was that I had checked the SCC's public case filing database on my phone in the driveway, and there was no case number matching the one on that document, and no active compliance review for my address in any SCC division, because I had checked all of them. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would be out within the hour and to not disturb the tag on the meter base. He was there in 50 minutes. He looked at the document for a long time. He looked at it the way someone looks at something that is more serious than they were prepared for. He said he needed to make some calls and would be back in touch by morning, and that what I was describing, if it was what it appeared to be, was not in the same category as a zoning complaint. He drove out. I went back inside, sat on the couch next to Callie until she fell asleep, and then moved to the desk and opened my laptop and started drafting the formal complaint to the State Corporation Commission. I had every document I needed already in the folder. I wrote until midnight. The folder was done. I filed the SCC complaint the next morning, complete document package, the forged order, Summit's disconnect paperwork, my printed SCC case search results showing no matching case in any division, my 25 years of co-op credentials with 3 former supervisor contacts, the complete complaint history from items 1 through 10, and the recorded assignment instrument for the 1962 easement corridor, item 12, with the county deed book page and the GIS overlay Ed had prepared showing the corridor, and Glenn Pruitt's Phase 2 conduit trench sharing 230 feet of the same ground. I sent copies to the County Commonwealth's attorney and to Summit Power Services directly with a cover letter asking Summit to confirm whether they had verified the document before acting on it. Summit's service manager called me back inside 4 hours. He said the document had appeared legitimate, and he was deeply sorry, and was cooperating fully with an internal review. He sounded like a man standing at the edge of something he had not seen coming and did not know how deep it went. I thanked him for calling and told him the SCC would be in touch. 2 days later, acting on the SCC's preliminary inquiry, Summit restored service to my parcel and sent a written apology. The week before the hearing, Glenn Pruitt's Phase 2 excavation crew suspended work on the conduit trench when the SCC's field inspector arrived at the site with a copy of the recorded easement assignment and explained, in the direct way of a regulatory inspector who is not there to negotiate, that any construction within the 50-foot corridor required written consent from the current easement holder. The current easement holder was me. I was not required to provide that consent on any timeline and had made no commitment to provide it at all. Glenn's construction lender sent a stop work notice within 48 hours. The SCC hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in a conference room at the regional office in Roanoke. Diane arrived with the HOA's Roanoke attorney and a leather portfolio. Glenn was not there. I arrived with Ed Ferris, my folder, and Carol Hines. The SCC examiner was a woman named Waverly, gray-haired, reading glasses on a lanyard, with the particular calm of someone who has spent decades looking at documents and can tell a real one from a fabricated one in the time it takes to set it down. She laid the forged compliance order flat on the table and looked at it without speaking for a moment. She had brought the SCC's own current letterhead standards document and a reference sheet of active division names and signature blocks. She compared them. She looked at the case number format. She looked at the division referenced in the body of the document, which had been reorganized and renamed in 2008, 17 years before the document's date. She set the document down and looked across the table at Diane's attorney. He looked at the table. Diane looked at the window. At nothing in particular, the way a person looks when they are trying to appear unconcerned and are not succeeding. I set my folder on the table and opened it. I named each document in order and pushed them toward Examiner Waverly one at a time. The April courtesy letter and the certified return receipt, item 1. The code officer's findings from the February inspection, no violations, item 3. Summit's withdrawal letter from the first meter-base complaint, item 4. Deputy Whitmore's visit reports, items 5 through 7. The HOA attorney demand letter and my refusal, item 9. Meg Dunlap's sworn affidavit, executed before a notary and signed 2 weeks earlier, with the Pruitt Landholdings memo attached, item 10. The SCC complaint and documentation package, item 11, and the recorded assignment instrument for the 1962 easement corridor, item 12, with the county deed book stamp, Ed Ferris's certification that he had witnessed the recording, and the GIS overlay showing the corridor and the Phase 2 conduit trench in the same 230 feet. 11 documented incidents over 4 years. 0 sustained complaints. 0 fines ever collected against my parcel. 0 valid code violations found. 1 easement recorded in 1962 by the Blue Ridge Rural Electric Cooperative, dormant for 30 years, assigned by recorded instrument to Ray Cotter for $1, running through 230 feet of Glenn Pruitt's proposed Phase 2 infrastructure. Examiner Waverly studied the GIS overlay for a full minute. She looked at the 1962 easement instrument with the original notary seal, and then at the assignment document with the recording stamp. She took her glasses off and set them on the table. She said the commission would be opening a formal fraud investigation into the fabricated compliance order and that Summit Power Services had already been placed on notice for the unauthorized disconnection. She said the conduit trench could not proceed within the recorded easement corridor without the written consent of the easement holder, and that was a matter for the relevant parties to negotiate, not one the commission could compel. She looked at Diane Pruitt for a moment, just a moment, and said the HOA's counsel should advise their client carefully regarding the Commonwealth's attorney referral that would be accompanying the commission's investigation findings. Then she stacked the documents, closed the folder, and told us the session was concluded. Glenn Pruitt's construction financing lapsed 11 weeks after the stop work notice. The lender's letter became public record when the mechanic's lien filings began to accumulate, and it was direct. Material delay in the project schedule and unresolved right-of-way conditions affecting a critical infrastructure component. Pruitt Landholdings missed its Phase 2 delivery deadline by 4 months and forfeited $2.3 million in committed financing. The open conduit trench sat behind orange construction fencing for most of that year, weeds growing up along the edges, while the paperwork ground through its process. The SCC's fraud investigation produced 14 code violations against Summit Power Services and a referral to the Commonwealth's attorney naming Diane Pruitt as the party who had provided the fabricated document to Summit. The Ridgemont Estates Board of Directors voted 7-1 to remove Diane as president at a special session that fall. Meg Dunlap told me later that Diane had not argued, had not made a speech, had not said much of anything. She had picked up her clipboard and her leather portfolio and walked out of the meeting room without looking at anyone. The clipboard had been her prop from the beginning. At the end, it was just something to hold. I was not there for any of it. That weekend, Callie had her regional cross-country qualifier, and I was on the sideline in the cold in my good jacket watching her run. She finished 3rd overall in her age bracket, the best she had ever done, and came home with her cheeks still red and her hair still damp from the post-race cool-down. And Rufus was already losing his composure at the door before she had the handle turned, spinning in the tight circles he saves for the people he loves most. We had dinner, the 3 of us counted by presence, if not by bodies, and Callie told me about the last half-mile, how her legs had found something she had not known was there, some reserve she had not trained into and had not expected, and how she had let it carry her. After, she sat at the kitchen table with her homework spread around her, and Rufus settled under her chair, and the lights were on, and the heat was running. And through the back window, the ridge had gone dark blue and still against the evening sky, the same sky Sandra and I had looked at the first time we walked this land together and decided it was where we were going to build something. The folder was on my desk in the drawer where it had always been. I had kept the promise. Sandra had picked this parcel because the deed was clean and the recorded history was long. She had been right. The history had gotten longer, and it had won. Here is what I want you to take from this. Go to your county's online land records portal and look up every recorded instrument on your parcel, not just the deed. The deed is the beginning. Pull the full chain. Recorded easements, plat notes, co-op filings, utility corridors, access grants, restrictive covenants, and every instrument that appears in the chain of title going back as far as the records go. Most county systems are free to search, and most clerks will walk you through a lookup if you call and ask. If you find something you do not recognize, do not set it aside. A dormant easement, a recorded covenant, an old right-of-way. Any of those can be worth more than you think, or more than someone else has counted on. If a neighbor, an HOA, or any third party sends you a letter claiming authority over your property, ask them in writing to show you the recorded instrument that grants it. If they cannot, put your refusal in writing, certify the mail, and file the receipt. That is where your record starts. Build the folder before you need it. Because the day you need it, you will not have time to start from scratch. And if a document arrives claiming to be from a regulatory agency or official body, verify it directly with that agency before you respond, before you comply, and before you assume it is real. A case number takes 30 seconds to check on a public database. Diane Pruitt counted on Summit, not checking. She was right one time. The dollar I sent to the utility authority cost her $2.3 million and the presidency. Drop your own story in the comments. If you have dealt with a boundary dispute, a bad easement claim, or someone who sent you a letter that did not look right, I read everyone. Subscribe if you are new here, because the next story is about a man who spent 30 years as a licensed county surveyor and came home to find the HOA had decided his boundary pins were decorative suggestions. He let them make that argument in front of the state licensing board. I will see you then.